What is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the fantasy headliners. We've got the burgundy sweatshirt back out, and that could only mean one thing: that crisp air is settling in right now, and we are into the thick of the football season. Week 7 is here. We've got another week of bye weeks. We're missing a couple of tight ends that normally we probably would be starting in our lineup. So if you're looking for any type of streaming options out there, if you need to know what backup tight end you should be using, we're going to cover all of that right now in my start and sit video for tight ends here in week 7. Let's go ahead and jump into it. And the Thursday night football matchup this week hopefully is a lot better than what we've seen in the last couple of weeks. New Orleans is going to head out to Arizona, and for the first time I believe in forever, I've got 3 tight ends listed as a start in one game. Now, Arizona allows the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Let's touch on Juwan Johnson first. He's a risky start, but last week, with basically every wide receiver missing, he played 78% of the offensive snaps, and Landry and Thomas are both expected to miss again this week, while it is expected that Chris Olave will end up being back. Now, going up against Arizona, the hope is that, hey, we're going to be throwing the ball a little bit. They give up a ton of points to tight ends. Juwan Johnson, if he can get 5 to 6 targets and catch 5 to 6 of those targets, we could be right on 50, 60 yards, and that's going to put him pretty close in a half PPR format to being a start for us. So I'm going to risk it, and I'm going to go with Juwan Johnson. Now with Taysom Hill, it's the same thing I tell you every single week with this guy, all right? You start him, you have fun with it. You want to start him, you have fun with it. If you want to get risky, okay. Well, you know what? I don't want to watch my lineup hoping that Taysom Hill is going to hit. It's tough with him. It's tough because he is, and yes, for those of you out there that disagreed last week, a gadget player. He is a gadget player. He's used in different gadget type of roles. That's what it is. He doesn't have a defined role, and because of that, it makes it risky every single start. I mean, last week, it should have been a smash start for him, and look what happened. For Zach Ertz, we're going to be going back to him no matter what. Now, New Orleans allows the second fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends. Ertz was on deck to lose some fantasy value. DeAndre Hopkins was a week away from returning, and then Marquise Brown goes down. That solidifies Zach Ertz's role in this offense for the rest of the season. He is going to be a safe option for us. For those of you that invested in him, hoping that we would get at least 6 really good weeks out of him, congratulations, because you're probably going to get 17 now. Cleveland at Baltimore, David Njoku, he's kind of fallen into that second tier of tight ends, that kind of safe tier where it's like, yeah, we know we're going to get a little bit of value. Maybe the upside isn't there every single week, but he's really proving to be a great fantasy asset this week or this season for us. We're going to continue to run him out there. Okay matchup against Baltimore. And then for Mark Andrews, okay matchup against Cleveland, but for as good as Mark Andrews is doing, it feels like he's just completely overshadowed by Travis Kelce right now. He's very close to Travis Kelce in every single statistical category. So just keep in mind, if you have Mark Andrews, you essentially have the tight end 1B. Tampa Bay and Carolina, unfortunately, is not going to offer us too much this week. Carolina allows the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends. It sounds like Cade Otton's going to be the only guy really that we could take a look at as far as the tight end goes. For Tampa Bay, Cameron Brate, second concussion in as many weeks. I don't expect him to be cleared for this week, which means Otton will kind of be the guy. But this is a tough game against Carolina. This offense has not been playing very well. We'll see what happens with it. I don't know if I'm going to risk trying to go with him this week, though. For Ian Thomas and Tommy Tremble, I mean, Tampa Bay does allow the 10th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. But again, I think I say this every single week. If you're starting them, you're screwed anyway. Atlanta and Cincinnati, and yeah, Kyle Pitts scored this past week. Yeah, he still only had like 30 receiving yards. I mean, it's great that he scored, but he's still not being utilized in that offense the way he should be. So, I mean, this is an okay matchup. We're still going to end up listing him as a start this week. Last week, he was really listed as a sit due to his injury score because we weren't 100% sure how healthy he was. But we're going to put him back as a start this week, and more than likely he's going to be very, very on the low end of the starting spectrum. For Hayden Hurst, Atlanta does allow the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight end, so we are going to go back to giving Hurst another shot this week. Yeah, we see some of that volume starting to dip now. T. Higgins, he was beat up, still saw a decent amount of targets last week, and even with a down performance, this is a low-end option for me. It's such a great matchup, though, that we have to really consider using him again at least one more week. Detroit and Dallas and TJ Hawkinson might be the riskiest 19 score I've ever seen in my entire life. Dallas allows the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and I don't like this matchup for TJ Hawkinson at all. Especially now that hopefully Amon-Ra St. Brown is back to being 100%. Josh Reynolds has been playing very, very well. Hopefully we'll have DeAndre Swift back. And because of all that, Hawkinson, as much as I like Hawkinson's talent, he still is not utilized to the way I feel like he should be in Detroit. So because of that, yeah, he's going to be a start this week for me, but he's very, very risky as well. For Dalton Schultz, Detroit allows the 8th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, and I would love to go with Dalton Schultz this week. But first off, I don't even know if he's playing. And second off, I don't know if Cooper Rush is going to be the quarterback or if Dak will be back this week. Last week was just a knee tweak, or obviously, when he ended up going down, it was just a knee tweak. Hopefully he doesn't end up missing any more time. Really kind of from what I read, held out for precautionary reasons this past week, but we'll see if we get him back this week against Detroit. But really for me, he doesn't go back to being a start until Dak is back. The New York Giants and the Jacksonville Jags. And listen, you're already noticing it. We've got quite a few starts this week. Everybody's basically on the lower end. There are not a ton of really good matchups this week. For Daniel Bellinger, again, I've been talking about this guy for weeks now, and I want to list him as a start. But this is a tougher matchup. And yes, Jelani Woods found the end zone last week against Jacksonville, but I don't know if I can fully trust this as of yet. He is a risky streaming option this week, but what I wouldn't be surprised of is essentially a stat line like we saw last week, where maybe he catches 3 of his 5 targets, gets you 30, maybe 40 yards, and it's that touchdown, that red zone touchdown that really saves his day. That is what I could see from him this week. So if you're starting him, just know that touchdown is going to be the key to unlocking his potential. For Evan Ingram, he continues to see plenty of targets, but not enough production. Because of all the targets he is seeing right now, though, it puts him into a start category for me. If you were asking me this week, Kyle, I believe that Evan Ingram and Daniel Bellinger are both risky options. Who would you rather risk it with? I'm going to go with my boy Belly. Indianapolis and Tennessee brings us some potential, but not enough potential to actually start anybody. Tennessee allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but Indianapolis is gridlocked with 3 basically starting tight ends right now. All 3 of them see a fair amount of targets, a fair amount of snaps, a fair amount of routes run. Just for me, and I took somebody off here because I was tired of putting 3 tight ends on the board every single week. So for right now, I'm going to keep Mo Alley-Cox and Jelani Woods on here. We'll see what happens with Grayson over the next couple of weeks if he is a guy that we end up replacing one of these. But honestly, unless one of them were to get hurt, I really can't trust any of these tight ends because we don't know on a weekly basis who it's going to be. For Austin Hooper, Indianapolis allows the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. It's a great matchup for Hooper, but he's really only being used as a blocker. He's not being used as your conventional tight end. So for right now, we're out the door. Green Bay and Washington has another matchup that I'm on the fence about, this time with Big Bobby Tonyan. Great game last week. 10 targets, 90 receiving yards. Definitely love the bounce back. But Green Bay was essentially trailing the entire time. I don't know if that's going to happen against Washington. If it does, Green Bay has some serious problems. Washington does also allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Right now, I'm listing him as a start, but he is a high-risk start. So again, for me this week, it's all about who do we want to risk it with the most. It's going to be very important for you to watch my ranking video this week because a lot of these guys are very close. Logan Thomas was limited last week with a calf, didn't end up playing on Thursday Night Football. Now he gets a few extra days of healing time, and hopefully that brings him back this week. Green Bay allows the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Thomas with that miss last week, it looks like he might be a better shot to play this week. So right now he is a sit for me, but as we find out more information, we'll update that in the rankings video. The New York Jets and the Denver Broncos is going to bring a guy that we could rely on earlier this season and no longer can't, and a guy that maybe we can rely on the rest of the year. Tyler Conklin is going to be moving back to being a sit for me right now. The entire passing game is kind of inconsistent and a mess, and not only that, Denver's defense is freaking legit, man. Look at what they did to the Los Angeles Chargers on Monday Night Football. This is a defense that is really stopping a lot of people in their path. For Greg Dulcich, I was actually asked in the comments by one person earlier this week, and I went back and I looked for the comment and I could no longer find it. And you asked me, what about Greg Dulcich? And my response was, right now, I can't trust it. They're using so many tight ends and none of them have been fantasy viable as of yet. And then Greg Dulcich goes out and he scores a touchdown that night. That's just how it works sometimes. Kudos to you. So whoever it was that left that comment, thanks again for bringing that up. Maybe I was a little too quick to be harsh on Dulcich. I like him. I think he's a good player, but I don't know if the offense is going to be able to give him the opportunity as of right now. 3 targets, caught 2 of them for 44 yards and a touchdown. The big thing about that touchdown we need to remember is he was left unattended. I mean, it was broken coverage. He just kind of scooted out down the field. He was wide open and he walked into the end zone. So keep that in mind as we talk about this. Don't overreact to that. This is not the best matchup and he would be much more of a risky start. However, he goes straight to a 5 in production because he's got 1 game and that per game average throws him up into the top 6 already. So we'll see how things start to even out over the coming weeks, but definitely a guy I'm taking a look at off the waiver wire that maybe will start in future matchups. Houston and Las Vegas, and I'm going to risk it with a Brevin Jordan start this week. Las Vegas allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game, and say it with me, Headliner Nation, it is more of a risky start, just like almost everybody is this week. I like the opportunity. He's kind of separating himself, not much, but just enough as kind of the main tight end option. And the matchup is going to be here against Las Vegas, where more than likely Houston's going to have to throw the ball a little bit. So because of that, hopefully that means we can find a little bit of volume, even just a little bit, for Brevin Jordan in a really good matchup this week. Darren Waller, he's going to be a start for me. Hopefully that week off kind of gave him some rest, and he's going to be able to come back healthy and ready to go for the rest of the season. Matchup's okay, but this is definitely a chance for him and this offense to bounce back. We'll monitor his status throughout the week. Seattle at the Los Angeles Chargers, and I went ahead and I've trimmed this team down as well. We're only going to list Noah Fant and Will Dissly for the time being. Fant is kind of starting to separate himself in the volume department, but we're going to have to continue to just keep an eye on that and see how much separation there is. At this point, there's not enough because Colby Parkinson is still a part of this tight end rotation. So they don't just have 2, they have 3 like a couple of other teams that they're constantly rotating in and out, which makes it very difficult to trust his volume on a weekly basis. For Gerald Everett, Seattle allows the most fantasy points per game. This right here would probably be one of the best starts and safest starts of the week. Except again, they're using a tight end rotation. A lot of teams are starting to go to that right now, which makes the tight end landscape even worse. Donald Parham is starting to get out there more and more often. He's starting to see some more routes. Now, Everett still led the tight ends in routes and snaps and targets, but the number is starting to drop. And Keenan Allen is getting closer to returning. Gerald Everett, unfortunately, could lose his fantasy value here very soon. Kansas City at San Francisco is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Head over to manscaped.com. Code word headliners at checkout. 20% off your entire order and free shipping. So if you need any stocking stuffers or gifts for that loved one in your life that needs a little bit of help trimming up the Christmas tree, well, hey, this holiday season, manscaped.com, code word headliners, is here to help you out. Now, with Kansas City and San Francisco allows the 7th fewest fantasy points per game. But guess what? Travis Kelce don't give no, he doesn't. You're still going to start him. He's the tight end 1. And hey, even in a game with low volume, he can still score 4 touchdowns, apparently. So he does it all. For George Kittle, big bounce back last week for George Kittle. Really, really good to see him finally get moving in the right direction. I talked about on the Start and Sit show last week and said I was going to risk it with George Kittle. I felt like this was the game that he needed to get going again, and absolutely he did. And that is why he's also going to be my prize picks prop to play for the tight end position this week. And we're going to go over the 47.5 receiving yards that Kittle is currently listed at over on Prize Picks. The matchup is going to be there. This is going to be a game in which San Francisco is going to have to throw a little bit. George Kittle is going to be on the receiving end of, hopefully, a lot of those targets. Pittsburgh and Miami, Sunday Night Football, Pat Freiermuth. Don't know if he's going to be cleared again this week. We will keep an eye on that. As of right now, still in that concussion protocol, but Miami allows the 11th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends this season. And Muth may not clear, but if he does, he is a guy that I am probably going to try and throw out there. A lot of people are talking about Chase Claypool, and he had a big game last week, and he's going to be on the rise. You can't forget, all right, that they, number one, had to go back to Mitchie Biscuits, and number two, there was no Pat last week. So those targets that he had been receiving, which is quite a bit, top 6 at the position on a per game average, because of that, that just gave a little bit extra to everybody else. We're not going to forget about the Muth, though, okay? If he plays this week, I think we got to get him in our lineup. For Mike Gesicki, Pittsburgh allows the 7th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. Do not get sucked in by the 2 touchdowns last week. Don't you do it. Don't you make that mistake, Headliner Nation, because it's going to hurt real, real bad. Chicago at New England brings Monday Night Football and absolutely nothing to see at the tight end position. All right, I kid a little bit. Cole Kmet, still not a big part of the game plan. They are starting to throw it more a little bit, which is good. But until we see some multiple weeks of Cole Kmet actually being utilized, I can't fall for that. Chicago allows the 6th fewest fantasy points per game. So Hunter Henry, who is actually seeing a little bit of an increase in his production with Bailey Zappi being at the quarterback position right now, could have potentially have been a decent streaming option this week, but I'm not going to risk it because there's other guys that I feel are less risky with more ceiling. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me today. Thanks everybody for tuning in to this tight end start and sit video. I appreciate y'all. Make sure you do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Hey, maybe consider becoming a member, joining down below, getting all of our extra flex, all of our extra flex rankings, all of our extra kicker, defensive special team rankings, video breakdowns that we're doing for members only, and obviously you got to get into Discord with us as well. But hey, hopefully y'all have a great rest of your week. I'm sure I'll catch you on some more videos though, so peace out, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll see y'all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.